So just like a lot of you, I was really excited to hear that Johnny was going to be the next character playable in Guilty Gear. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been 3D printing his sword and his coin. There were a lot more challenges from last time when I made Bridget's bullet yo-yo, mainly because of the filament I used and just the general size of it was much bigger. I started off with the coin because it stood out to me as a focal point of the trailer, and it looked fun to make. When I started this project, there wasn't much reference for the new Johnny. There was stuff from the older games, but I wanted to make sure that the props were as accurate to the new version as possible. So for now, all I had to work with was the footage from the trailer. Luckily, there was a really good close-up of both sides of the coin when he flicks it, so I screenshotted that and imported it into Blender. My plan was to take two thin discs and then use the knife tool to trace the design onto them. I'd then extrude them and add ridges to the circumference of the circle. I'm really pleased with how these look. I test printed the different sizes and filaments to see what I liked until I got this draft. With this out of the way, I now needed to start on the katana. There's a lot to unpack with this part of the project because this is where I learnt the most through a lot of trial and error. I used this part of the trailer for reference and then used a box and extruded it to the same size of the sheath. I then remembered I already had a katana looking blade from the Kokoro Watori that I made a couple months ago. So I imported that and then reshaped it to the size of the sheath. I subdivided it to make it smooth and then used a boolean to cut the inside of the sheath out, which would hold the blade. Here's the first draft of the blade. As you can see, it's not very strong. Trying to find the correct length, width, and weight of the blade was something, but it was an issue that kept popping up and had to keep getting adjusted over and over again during this project. I went back to Blender, thickened out the blade, and then printed it again in a lower resolution. I also added some sockets to each part of the blade so they slotted together better and gave it some more support. This one was a lot more secure until I accidentally sat on it and it snapped. I also printed drafts of the handle, the habaki, and a part of the sheath. I was happy with the design, so now it was time to get some filament. I got silk silver for the blade, silk bronze for the coin, and wood coloured PLA for the sheath. Turns out this wasn't just wood coloured filament, but was instead plastic with actual fragments of wood inside. And believe it or not, wood doesn't like to be heated upwards of 200 degrees. I found this out the hard way after waking up to find my print of the handle with the top part missing. I then looked at the nozzle on my printer and it was dripping with black liquid. I'd never used this sort of filament before and I didn't even know it existed, so I didn't do the research before I tried using it. This was my first major issue that caused a lot of wasted time. I tried to remove the remaining filament, but it wouldn't budge. I then took out my Bowden tube and found a piece of molten plastic melted to the inside. Great. So I had to cut the tube and buy a new one. So all I had to do was remove the remaining filament from the extruder, and it went really well, except it didn't. The brittle plastic snapped inside of the extruder, and there was no way of getting it out. So I also added a new extruder and some 0.6 nozzles to my basket, and then cried as I looked at my bank account. I replaced the new parts and retried. Nope, it melted and clogged the nozzle again. I'd already wasted so much time on this issue, so I decided to cut my losses and just buy some actual just wood colour filament. It's a real shame because the part of the handle that did print looked really nice and it actually felt of wood. But I would never, I'd never recommend printing with wood PLA. Please do not do that to yourself. With the new filament, I started printing what would actually be the final prop. I'd spent hours printing the blade at a high resolution and I was really excited to see it come together. But this wasn't meant to be. I'd swung it just a little too hard at the wrong angle, and because of its length and width, it just snapped under its own weight. This felt like a massive step back and I was really close to not continuing, but I had to see it through to the end. So I went back to Blender and I shortened the blade to distribute the weight better. I also found out that silk PLA is a lot weaker than a normal PLA, so I went back to the plastic that I'd used for the draft, the grey one, to keep it secure. Making these changes along with some changes to the settings in Kura made the blade a lot thicker and a lot stronger. I printed my katana on a 0.2 layer height for the speed, but if you were to make your own, I would recommend doing it on a 0.1 just for the extra strength. Now it was time to put it all together. I used Gorilla Glue to stick all the pieces together, and the sockets I made on the parts of the katana really helped keep it in place. I then used some earth shade paint to define the back of the coin a little better. And with that, here is Johnny's katana and coin from Guilty Gear Strive.
The god of failure. Just lean.
Thanks a lot for watching. I learned a lot from this project, especially about the considerations I need to take in for the length, width, and weight of a weapon when you're making a 3D printed prop, as well as what type of filaments work better for which situations. As always, the STL files will be on my Etsy store and Boost store if you want to go and make your own. Also, if you don't have your own printer, don't stress, because you can use these two websites here. You can send them the files, they'll give you a quote, they'll then print them off, and then they'll send them to you. I always appreciate the support heavily on these types of projects, so if you do get one, thank you very much. I've also made a guide sheet to explain how to assemble the sword and how to paint the coin. Also, please consider subscribing and following my Twitter, that helps out a lot as well. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and see ya.